All right, let's jump right in. Today we're unpacking a really specific prophecy from the book of Isaiah, chapter 11, verses 10 through 16. Now, the source material we're looking at sees this not as some dusty old story, but as a living roadmap for a massive modern gathering of people. So, what does it actually say? Let's find out together. So, here's how we're going to tackle these 7 verses. We'll start with this idea of an ensign for the nations to figure out what this call to gather is all about. Then we'll get into how the prophecy talks about old rivals making peace while new enemies are overcome. And finally, we'll look at the incredible promise of a miraculous highway home.
Okay, let's dive into section 1. These first few verses are absolutely key. They really set the stage by introducing us to a central figure and kicking off what's described as a major global event.
Right out of the gate, verse 10 gives us 2 phrases you really got to lock onto: the root of Jesse and the ensign. According to the text, these are basically the symbolic keys to unlocking everything else that follows. So that's the big question, isn't it? Who or what is this root of Jesse? Is it a person, a place, an idea? The prophecy is so specific, it feels like figuring this out is critical to the whole passage. And here we go. The source material gives us a pretty direct interpretation. It says this root of Jesse isn't an ancient king, but a specific person living in the last days, someone descended from both Jesse and Joseph, who's given the authority to kickstart this great gathering. And what about that other word, ensign? Well, think of it like a giant flag or a banner. In the ancient world, an army would raise their standard on a hilltop as a clear signal, a rallying point. So in this prophecy, it's this huge, symbolic, unmistakable signal for people everywhere to start coming together. Now, when we get to verse 11, we get this huge clue about the timing. You see that phrase, the second time? That's not just thrown in there. The source sees this as a marker pointing to a very specific period in history. And this is so important. The prophecy isn't talking about the ancient return from Babylon. No, the source material identifies this second time as a modern gathering, one that really ramped up after centuries of people being scattered, specifically pointing to events after World War I and World War II. Then verse 12 just blows the doors wide open. This ensign isn't just a local thing, it's for all nations. And notice, the call goes out to both the outcasts of Israel and the dispersed of Judah. It's signaling this big reunification of people from literally the 4 corners of the earth. The scale here is just massive. It's global. Okay, and here's a really cool subtle detail that comes from analyzing the original Hebrew. The word translated as outcasts usually refers to men, while the word for dispersed often means women. So the implication here is pretty powerful. This gathering is for everybody, a complete restoration, bringing back both men and women from those long-divided kingdoms. All right, on to our second section, and this is where the interpretation of the prophecies shifts, from something purely spiritual to an event with some very real-world political and military happenings, seen specifically through the lens of 20th century history. Verses 13 and 14 really switch gears. First, they talk about healing this ancient internal rivalry. But then, in the same breath, they pivot to talk about taking on external enemies from both the East and the West. So first things first, verse 13 points to the end of a really deep, ancient division, that rivalry between the northern kingdom, represented by Ephraim, and the southern kingdom of Judah. The text says that old envy is just going to disappear, and they'll finally be able to act as one unified people. And this is where the source material draws a straight line to events in the 20th century. It interprets the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 as being part of this prophecy's fulfillment. The war that followed is seen as the defeat of adversaries in lands that correspond to ancient Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And then that phrase, spoil them of the East, is connected to the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel took control of territories to its east. Now for our final section, this is where the language of the prophecy gets even more dramatic. I mean, the source interprets these next verses as describing literal, physical changes to the Earth's geography, all to clear a path for this great return. Wow, the imagery in verse 15 is just stunning, isn't it? It's talking about destroying the tongue of the Egyptian sea and hitting a massive river so hard that it splits into 7 small streams, letting people just walk right across on dry ground. So what are these places? Well, the source basically pulls out a map. It identifies the tongue of the Egyptian Sea as the Gulf of Suez. The river is interpreted as the mighty Nile, and the 7 streams would be the Nile Delta. So this reading really grounds the prophecy in specific real-world locations. And the final verse, verse 16, ties it all together. It promises a highway for the people coming home, and it makes this incredible comparison, saying it will be just like the most foundational miracle in their history, the parting of the Red Sea when they came out of Egypt. So this highway is the grand finale of the prophecy. It's a promise that any obstacle, whether it's political, geographical, or anything else, that's blocking the people from returning, will just be swept away, creating this wide-open, clear path for them to come home. To really get the feel, the spirit of this gathering, the source points to this powerful prayer from 1841 on the Mount of Olives. It imagines this return not as some slow trickle, but as a swift, massive movement of people, like clouds and like doves to their windows. It's just a beautiful, powerful image. So when you step back and look at it all, what's the big takeaway? We've seen how these verses in Isaiah are viewed not just as ancient history, but as a prophecy that's actively unfolding in our world. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. How do ancient prophecies like this one actually shape our understanding of modern events?